Hello everyone, welcome back. I'm Kris. This is the final video. Yeah, I had to do that last time. For some reason, it glitches when it starts up. I think it's the shirt gets all green. I don't know. I've tried other shirts. It doesn't matter. So we're gonna go ahead and finish this bad boy off. Before we do, thumbs up, subscribe, donate to the channel, thanks button. You get it. You got it.
Just shooting. Like, what is that?
I went back a little bit.
I don't understand. I feel like maybe we shouldn't do that to begin with, but then if we're going to do it, let's at least be efficient. Anyway, in the midst of all of this, 1968 happens. So, to understand 1968, I'm going to invoke 1952 and 1956. So, Eisenhower. In 1952, the Democrats know who their candidate is, they just haven't announced him. His name is Adlai Stevenson. The Democrats have some primaries in multiple states. The guy who came in first place in the primaries, not by a landslide by any means, but he still came in first place, was a guy named Estes Kefauver. Estes Kefauver won the few primaries that actually had presidential primaries in the United States, because most primaries didn't. The Democratic Party then announced Adlai Stevenson was the nominee, because it didn't matter who won the primaries for the presidency. A group of men, Protestant, rich white men in a smoke-filled room, Cuban cigars, some cognac, maybe whiskey, make the decision for the Democratic Party and the Republican Party who's going to run. That's why the Democratic Party could offer Eisenhower the nomination at the same time the Republican Party did. There was no primary process that led to that. So, fast forward. It's 1968. A group of college students realized they could become delegates for the Democratic Party. And so they did. And the next thing you know, a huge chunk of the Democratic Party's delegates that are going to go to the Democratic National Convention in Chicago are a bunch of college students who had been part of the activist movement. Some of them were members of the SDS, for example. Some of them were, into the civil rights movement. Next thing you know, there's all these kids. They look like kids because they're in their 20s, even if they're adults, walking into the DNC. Before we got to the DNC, Bobby Kennedy was winning. He gets to California on June 5th. He wins California. He's got the majority of Democratic Party convention delegates. So he's the guy who won the primaries. He's then shot to death inside the hotel. There are 3 Democratic candidates left. Hubert Horatio Humphrey, the vice president. Everybody hates his guts, partly because of his name. Then there's George McGovern and Eugene McCarthy. So, warning, I don't mean Tail Gunner Joe. This isn't Joseph McCarthy. Joseph McCarthy and Eugene McCarthy were opposites. If they had ever actually touched each other, they would have destroyed the state of Wisconsin. When that much matter and antimatter make contact, it creates an explosion. So this is a different guy. This is Eugene. Eugene was about as far to the left as you could be in American politics and get elected to Congress. He was the Bernie of the time. He was that guy. And then Joseph McCarthy was the Hitler? Yeah, something like that. He was the other side. He was the Red Scare guy with, I have a list of known communist agents who are destroying America. And he didn't have anything. He had like a napkin with crayon writing on it. So, those 3 guys. Eugene comes.
And Eisenhower hated McCarthy. And all his Red Scare talk and everything like that, he despised him.
Comes in first. George McGovern comes in second. Hubert Horatio Humphrey comes in 3rd place. So everybody's assuming Eugene McCarthy is the next nominee for the Democratic Party. So they get up to announce, and we are proud to announce that Hubert Horatio Humphrey is the next candidate for president of the United States. And they go nuts. The next thing you know, the delegates are pouring into the street to protest what they believe was a stolen election, in part because they naively believed that the primaries mattered. The primaries didn't matter. It wasn't party rules that the primaries matter. They just did it for symbolic gesture purposes. And then they would pick the guy that they wanted. And they picked the guy they wanted. They picked the insider. They picked the guy who was part of the party machinery. He was the vice president, who kept claiming that if he was elected president, he would win the Vietnam War. Whereas the Republican candidate kept saying, if I'm elected president, I will end the Vietnam War. By the way, McGovern and McCarthy also said they would end the war. Also, think about how weird it was. Kennedy, McGovern, and McCarthy, it was like 3 Celts in a country, right, where the English usually win, not Celts. We don't make much space for Celts. I mean, McKinley, but then we shot him to death. I mean, Reagan eventually, but we shoot him too. You know what I mean? Like, the Celts are going to get shot. That's the pattern. There aren't many of them. There's a couple of Dutch guys, a few Germans. The rest are English. A half Kenyan, half English guy. But it's mostly English, which is really weird, because like the English are like it goes German, Irish, Mexican, English. They're 4th. Like, why are we so dominated by number 4? Just because it was dad? That's weird. Seems like misplaced loyalty. For the record, the credit bureau also loves English. If you have an English last name, you automatically get a boost in your credit score. So just remember that. So the students are in the street. They're not just students. The delegates for the DNC are in the street protesting, and the police riot. You don't have to believe me. Go look at the video. There's a bunch of video out there. The police riot. In fact, the students are chanting, "The whole world's watching. The whole world's watching," because they know the cops are going to riot. Because they're veterans. At 68, they've been in the trenches for like 7 years, sleeves rolled up and bruises all over because the cops keep rioting. And sure enough, the cops riot. In the aftermath of this, we make the decision. The McGovern Commission in 1970 suggests to the Democratic Party that we should let the primaries count. In 1972, for the first time in US history, the Democratic Party lets the primaries count. The Republican Party gets embarrassed. So in 76, the Republican Party announces it's going to do the same thing. The Democratic Party and the Republican Party sat down and worked it out so that the primaries would be on the same day. Now, obviously, we screwed that up this primary, but up until this primary, the primaries were always on the same day so that it wouldn't be confusing to people. And then this last primary, Biden ordered the Democratic Party to switch the order, and the Republican Party refused, so that's why there was a little bit of confusion. So here's what happened since. So 76 is our first election where the primaries are involved. When you think about it from an information standpoint, who knows politicians better than party bosses? Literally nobody. And then the public, when you think about the kind of information they have, when we poll them, one of the things we've discovered is the average American can't identify their own political ideology. Like, we'll ask a series of questions. How do you feel about public transportation, gun control, abortion, immigration, the death penalty? And then we'll go, okay, now how do you identify yourself politically? And like 4 out of 10 times, Americans will misidentify themselves. They will go, I'm conservative when they're liberal, I'm liberal when they're conservative. It's really sad and painful and hilarious at the same time. So we go from party bosses who know every little nasty detail about the politicians, because a lot of times the party bosses don't even run for office. Sometimes they do, and you know their names. Like, Nancy Pelosi was a party boss for the Democratic Party. James A. Baker III was a party boss for the Republican Party. You probably haven't heard of Baker, but you've heard of Pelosi, right? It's just, sometimes you do.
James Baker was was that chief of staff for Reagan? James Baker. American attorney, diplomat, statesman, member of the Republican Party. He has served as the 10th White House Chief of Staff and 67th United States Secretary of Treasury under Ronald Reagan. Okay, so under Ronald Reagan. Okay, so he was the White House Chief of Staff. And 61st U.S. Secretary of State before returning as the 16th White House Chief of Staff under George H.W. Bush. How do you go from 10th? And then the next president, you're the 16th. I don't know.
Sometimes you don't. It's just a thing. So we switch it over to the primaries. Who's going to get the information to the public? The news media. But the news media has a conflict of interest. The news media's goal isn't to inform, it's to make profit. When your goal is to make profit, your goal is to get people to tune in. It means your goal is to entertain. So if you wanted to inform, think about what the news media would have to do. You'd have to sit there and go, okay, candidate A here believes in X, Y, Z. Candidate B believes in these three things over here. And then compare and contrast, and then look at the past and say, this policy never has worked. Cutting taxes to the rich always destroys the economy. It's never stimulated it, not once. Right? You would have to sit there and bust the myths that Americans have. George Washington didn't have wooden teeth. You'd have to sit there and say, this is wrong. The earth is a sphere. It's not flat. Right? You'd have to do this. Or you could treat it like a horse race. You go, oh, Trump's ahead. Biden's ahead. Will there be a Democrat or a Republican that can do anything about it? Oh, all right? And then you keep it going and you try and make it exciting so people tune in, so you can sell ads. And that's what they started to do in 1976. Instead of informing, they went for the horse race because, well, A, it was going to make the money, but also, just because you're a journalist doesn't mean you're a political scientist. So there was also an information gap. And we had just handed over this incredibly vital, important task to these private corporations. Big mistake. But the results are fascinating. Jimmy Carter was the outsider in the Democratic Party. Nobody had heard of him outside of Georgia. He wins the nomination, and then he beats Gerald Ford. He was an insider. He had been part of the establishment. He had been part of Congress. In other words, the outsider wins the nomination and then wins the presidency. 1980, Reagan runs against Carter. Reagan is also the outsider. He was governor of California, but other than that, he was just a bad actor in both terms, like bad acting skill, but also a bad actor. So in other words, he's an outsider. And as an outsider, he beats all the other Republicans to win the nomination. He actually did really well in 76. So well that my dad went, oh my God, he's going to be the next president in 1980. And I was like, oh, cool. My dad can predict too. What ends up happening then is Reagan, as an outsider, comes in and wins. He ends up running in 84 against Walter Fritz Mondale. Mondale was totally an insider. He had been Carter's vice president. Reagan trounces him. Then they run a vice president, George Bush Sr., against Dukakis. Dukakis was an insider. It's true, George Bush Sr. had been vice president for 8 years, but he was actually also an outsider because prior to that, he was the head of the CIA. He didn't have like a civilian job. He was the guy in charge of the Assassination Bureau, the Mayhem and Murder Bureau, right? He's not a politician. Now he wins. He beats Dukakis. The Democrats pick an outsider, Bill Clinton. Nobody thought that a Democratic candidate could win in 92, so they picked Bill Clinton because they're like, this will end his career, because the Democrats never run a guy second time. There's an exception. 1956, they ran Adlai Stevenson a second time. So you get one shot and you're done. Republicans will run a second time, but not Democrats. We don't want, the Democratic Party is like, no, one time, you're done. So everybody thinks, okay, Clinton, he'll lose, and then we'll run in 96 and beat whoever's replacing George Bush. and Clinton wins out of nowhere, right? And then in 96, it's Bob Dole, an insider. Clinton beats him. And then in 2000, Al Gore is totally the insider. George Bush was governor of Texas for 6 years. He couldn't string together a coherent sentence to save his life. He's the guy that said, I'm going to help you put food on your family. He's the guy who said, our enemy are clever, see? And so are we. They're always thinking of new ways to harm America. And so are we. You know, that kind of honesty is really refreshing, but disturbing. It's incredible. Like, wow, he may be the first honest president. Rumsfeld is right next to him when he's doing it. Rumsfeld is like, you can tell Rumsfeld is like, oh, I don't think you should say that. Well, anyway, Bush, the outsider, wins. He defeats Gore. Then in 2004, it's Mitt Romney. Romney is the insider again. I'm sorry, Mitt Romney. John Kerry. It's John Kerry. John Kerry is the insider again. And I was telegraphing because Mitt Romney's coming. And right, the outsider beats him again. And then in 2008, it's Clinton's turn. I can't tell you how many times I heard Democratic Party bosses get up in front of the voters and say, you can't vote for Obama. It's Clinton's turn. She's worked her way up. He's cheating. He's the guy who'll run in 2016. And then, of course, they get booed. Like, boo, and then vote for Clinton. For Obama. So Obama beats Clinton. He's an outsider. He didn't even finish the Senate term. He was 4 years into his 6-year Senate term when he beats her. And then he turns around and he beats John McCain, the insider. And then 4 years later, he beats Romney, another insider. And then comes 2016. Clinton's gonna get her turn, the insider, and she's beaten by a guy who never had any political anything. He was the purest of the outsiders. In other words, the American public, since we unleashed them into the political system, has picked the least powerful, least experienced, least knowledgeable candidate to run for office and then elected them every time until 2020. What was Donald Trump's big thing against Biden? He's got 47 years of experience. And it was like, oh my God, that's so refreshing as opposed to 0 years of experience. Like he may have actually even read part of the Constitution at one point, briefly. He forgot it because it was 47 years ago. But still, exposure, maybe there's like a kernel of it hooked in the back of his mind. Like he knows he's not supposed to pick up the phone when Taiwan calls to congratulate him, for example. He knows he's not supposed to fly to Singapore and meet with North Korean leaders. You know what I mean? Like, because he's been an insider for 47 years. In other words, one of the things that's happened is we've taken the presidency and turned it into this really weird ideological tool that has unfortunately resulted in relatively bad set of politicians. I mean, Nixon was an awful president, but when you think about it, almost every president since has been awful. We haven't had, Obama and Biden and George Bush Sr., those three are like the best out of the lot. Don't get me wrong, Jimmy Carter is lovely. Like, I want to hang out with him, in part because he can cure brain cancer. Like, I'm just blown away by that. Usually you die from that, you don't walk away from it. He makes homes for Habitat for Humanity. Like, he's a nuclear physicist. He was an adjunct professor at one point. Like, but he wasn't a great president. Like 4 years, he got a bunch of nothing done. So not in that zone. You know you're in trouble when you're looking to George Bush Sr. and Biden and Obama and going, man, that's the best we could produce after Eisenhower and Roosevelt and Lincoln. You know, there has been talent in the past. Somehow we've lost that. So as we're going into this election, I just want to point out, like, if you're sitting there going, what the heck? This is the choice? How is this a choice? I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this. I don't know how we've painted ourselves into this corner, but that's what we've brought ourselves to. It almost makes me want to get rid of the primaries and go back to, a smoke-filled room with a bunch of really rich Protestant heterosexual, were they heterosexual? Really rich Protestant white men. Because we don't know, actually. And that makes me sad, too. Anyway, we're totally way out of time. I didn't quite cover everything I wanted to, but I knew that there's no way I'd ever get to it all. But I hope I kind of gave you an idea of what's at stake. Like that we've got this evolving presidency that we've lost sort of control over, and the thing has become something I don't think it was ever intended to be. But in part, that's our own doing. This is our fault because we've turned it into this ideological contest, and there's no ideology. Here's my closing thought. Go through and pick your list. So, like public transportation, for or against. Universal background checks on weapon purchases, for or against. Abortion, for or against. Just go through it. Should immigrants be allowed, or should we just eject them all? Right? Go through. If only the Native Americans had known that was an option. And just go through, right? Just work it out. Now tell me what the universal truth is, the universal ideological thing that connects them together. So like, let's say you hate public transportation and abortion and gun control. What's the thing that brings those three positions together? What's the ideology? Like, tell me what purpose does it serve to have those three things connected? There's nothing there. Our ideologies in the United States are hollow. Who came up with Obamacare? The Reagan administration. Who was the first person to implement it? Mitt Romney. In 2012, Obamacare is standing next to Romney Care. And Romney goes, I'm against Obamacare. And you could see Obama go, it was like he had a bunch of wasabi, like his brain hollowed out. And he turns and looks at white Obama, and he goes, what do you mean you made Romney Care? It was the Republican Party that came up with this idea. I'm implementing your idea. And they're like, we don't care. It's because it's you, we're against it. That's what we've become. When Americans are asked, do you like the Affordable Care Act? 60% say yes. When they're asked, do you like Obamacare? 40% say yes. That's the America that we've become. Like, it's the same thing. Where's that 20% error of, obviously it's ignorance, but that's also a problem. There are voters who don't know anything. Please stay home. Like your whole life you're told it's your duty to vote. No, it's your duty to be informed. It's not your duty to vote. If you are informed and you don't vote, you're a jerk. I hate you. Anyway, okay, that's the thought I'll leave you with. And
all right. Ow. It's interesting that since Carter, since 39, I'll have to look, kind of go through, but newcomers. Well, I mean, Lincoln did serve 2 years and then went back to being a lawyer, and that was what built him up. Grant, never a politician, but he was a military guy. So anyways, it's interesting. I'm going to look into that. But hope you enjoyed. Until next time, have a good day. Have a good night.